All right, all right. Welcome to the Passion in Motion podcast. It's me, your host, Muta, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, um, Mr. Charlie Ramos. He is animator extraordinaire. In case you're wondering on some of the things he's worked on, he's a layout artist, been a director of cinematography, worked at DreamWorks, Pixar, has done Shrek 2, Madagascar, Over the Hedge, Monsters University, Inside Out, Finding Dory, Cars 2 and 3, worked at LucasArts, very long career in animation, in gaming, and all these other fun stuff. And currently he is the lead layout artist in Quebec at what is it? Real FX Animation, if I'm not, yeah. But
Yes,
anyway,
that was my last gig was
that's the last gig. Yes.
that was the last one.
Awesome, awesome. But anyway, people, this is Charlie. So welcome, Charlie. How's it going?
It's going all right. It's going all right. Enjoying some decent weather in Montreal now.
I
So
love it.
it's finally come around.
It's gonna come around. Yes, summertime is here. Summertime is here.
Yep.
Yeah. So, as we get started here, I'm sure we're gonna get into all these movies that you've worked on, but I just wanted to start from the beginning so that, because the people out there always think like, I know, how do people get into animation? How do people end up working at these big corporations, the Disneys, the Pixars, the DreamWorks, and working on
Mm.
these high grossing movies, and all those. I'm sure people have always been curious about like just how does one even like do that? I know I am because I'm a big animation person. Some of the movies that you worked on, as I was saying earlier, like are some of my favorite animations of all time. Over the Hedge. I think I've watched that at least 7 times. So over my lifetime, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna watch it again when I have kids. I'm gonna make them watch that. So it's gonna be one of those things that we keep going at it. But
Yeah.
anyway, so to just start from the very, very beginning, Charlie, to know more about you. What was this always your dream as a child to be involved in animation or to be an animator or to be an artist, to be a painter? Like, what was that? What was that for you when you were growing
No,
up?
no, I didn't consider animation. I mean, I always loved animation. I grew up with the early, very early stuff, Warner Brothers, in the 60s and early 70s and stuff like that. But I didn't get any sense of any kind of connection to the animation world or to the film world until Star Wars. Like many people in my generation, Star Wars just woke something up and made, I don't know, it just gave you this sense of possibilities and just it was just inspiring.
Yeah.
And me and my friends we tried to make our own version of Star Wars. We were so excited about it that we were painting ping pong balls and with toilet paper rolls and making
Yeah.
TIE fighters and stuff. I mean, I was supposed to be Han Solo, and I that Halloween I went with my very cheap costume, and I think they told me I was a cowboy, and I was so depressed and so
Oh man.
bummed out about that. But I was still energized and really into just it just kind of got the artistic and creative side in me going. And so another part of it is that I as we talked before, I told you I moved a lot during my life. When I was born in El Paso, Texas, and immediately, I was 3 years old. We moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. At 6, to Chiapas in Mexico. Then back up north, Washington State, Texas, California. I've been in a lot of places. And I think for me, the way to connect with people, from an early age, I knew I could draw pretty well.
Mm.
And it was my easy in to connect with people and make friends was drawing. I could make little cartoons of the teacher and stuff like that.
Oh,
And it was like this easy way to connect with people.
you were a
And
doodler. You used to doodle.
I doodled, yeah. And so that was my way of kind of making friends and connecting. And so I always drew, and it was also an escape for me.
Mm.
Like many artists, drawing kind of is this way to just disconnect from the world and
Yeah.
be in your own little bubble and stuff. And so that was it. But animation didn't wasn't on my at all in my horizon. I was just focused on on drawing and art. And so it didn't it didn't I went to art school. I studied illustration at the Academy of Art in San Francisco. And at the time it was fairly bleak in the sense that an illustrator's options were go to Kansas City, Missouri and make Hallmark cards.
Hmm.
That was actually one of the big options was
Really?
maybe I get
Oh.
to go to Kansas City and make Hallmark cards. Um, and actually, a few people I know did that for a while, and Disney, but Disney wasn't a huge,
Hmm.
they don't hire that many people at the time. In fact, I think it was at the kind of bottom, that's when Disney was doing like the Black Cauldron and the Hound. What was it called? The Fox and the Hound and
Yes,
those
those
movies.
old type, yeah.
Yeah, so it wasn't like they weren't, now, they're huge again and but so there was limited openings at the time. And it didn't even seem like the kind of stuff I wanted to do. I wanted to do more editorial illustration and work in magazines and stuff.
Yeah. But
The
just a quick question. So what made you say you want to study illustrations in college? Like, what led up to that point where you decided to actually do that in college?
I knew I had an ease in, I had a talent for drawing
Hmm.
and I knew it was something that I was never very good at school. I didn't do well at all in high school. And it wasn't until I decided on going into fine arts or into illustration that I really started focusing. For a while, it didn't even seem like it was an option. My father's a doctor and, it just felt like that was the expectation was to go into sciences or go into something, a serious
Yes.
career.
Yeah.
And so it took a lot of shifting around in my head to get to the point where I thought this is really just it's pretty much the only possibility for me is if I do something in that vein and I think it was scary for me. It was scary for my father. But once I kind of started on that road, it just felt like that was the natural call for me.
That's so fascinating because I was going to ask you like if you had parental support in your artistic endeavors because coming from myself, coming from a Zimbabwean background, African
Yeah,
background, I also had a knack for drawing and art, right? Like I always wanted, like I told you before, like I love cartoons, I love animation. I used to
yeah,
draw, I would watch Dragon Ball Z on TV and like I'll draw it all the time and
yeah,
just try and get the angles right, you know
yeah,
all that fun stuff. But then, I would tell my parents like, I love this stuff. Even coloring, I was really good at coloring as a kid, and I love coloring. And I'm like, hey, you know what? Maybe this is something like, what if I become a cartoonist in Zimbabwe? And they'll be like, listen, our son, there's no money in art.
Oh man, I have the best relationship with my dad right now. But his advice to me when I told him I wanted to go into art was, "Hey, be a plastic surgeon." It's like I couldn't even like how do
Yeah.
those things work together? And so yeah, it took a long time for us to finally meet in a place where he kind of understood that was pretty much the only options available for me was to become an artist. Otherwise, I just wasn't going to have the focus or the ambition to keep going. I was
Yeah.
really like that was the only thing that was exciting for me.
And I mean, look at it's worked out well, right? Like it's you've actually been able to get involved in a lot of big things, and it seems like
Yeah,
it's actually worked. Because again, people back home or just in general, they would say this is not a viable profession. You're not gonna make money from this because
yeah,
people really usually don't know what the options are. Like
yeah,
I think people just think cartoons come out of nowhere
yeah.
and they're just there on TV.
So
It's
there's
actually
some
like
magic
there's
happening.
some magic. Yeah, it's like there are people
Yeah,
behind that working really hard to actually like do this. It's a very layered process, and
yeah,
those people are really like revered in those industries and they actually do really well in their lives and stuff like that. But people just have no idea because again, it's the doctor, the engineer, you know, all
yeah.
these other professions that get all the clout. But cartoons and TV have been around for longer than doctors, So I mean,
Yeah, I mean it's a road that you kind of yeah, there's risks involved and you have to kind of break through some maybe some barriers of
yeah,
the dialogue with your parents and I mean, it was a shock for my dad, who, being a doctor, like that just it didn't seem like a possible option.
Yeah.
I think what happened was at first I told him I wanted to be a rock star,
Mm.
and then being an artist was like, okay, at least he
Like,
just wants to be an
yeah.
artist.
Okay. Yeah. Was that like a ploy you used to like? Let me say the most
No,
extreme thing, and then
for a while I was really, really wanting.
were you
I
musically inclined?
I like playing guitar. I'm not good at it at all. I really suck. But I like it. And,
Yeah.
I can play enough to, pump a song out, but
Yeah.
nowhere near like what I'd like to be. But yeah, I think just by me setting the bar so low for him, he's just like, oh my God, he wants to finally do something that seems kind of more sane than be a rock star. And
Yeah.
so he was happy for me to do it. And I think
Yeah.
I wrote him out this whole presentation of what my plans and goals were in the art world and stuff.
Yeah.
And so yeah, he liked it. When he saw it on paper, being the kind of scientific mind he has, it was like,
Hmm.
okay, this makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's what usually convinces parents. I'm like, okay, I know it looks like you're serious. Fine, go do this thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Write it. I
Yeah.
want to see your objectives. I want to see a list of your,
Yeah.
and
That's
so yeah, it worked. It
that is so
worked.
cool. Yeah, I love that little segue. But okay, so yeah, now doing illustration in college, and then afterwards, so people are going to do homework stuff. So what journey did you take after you graduated?
I didn't have any after that. I had done some illustration. I did a little bit of editorial illustration in San Francisco for smaller magazines and little news, those little
Yeah.
newsprint kind of things that you get on the street, stuff like that. And I fell in love with a Spanish girl, and I
Mm,
was focused on just moving to Spain.
yeah.
And I had this whole romantic idea. I was reading a lot of Hemingway and a lot of like those adventurous kind of Henry Miller and all those guys that ended up
Yes.
in Europe and lived this amazing romantic life. And it didn't work out with her at all. But
Mm.
I started doing even more serious editorial work. And here's another interesting story. I was totally illegal there. I didn't
Oh.
have any work papers, and so what I had to do was I had a hostel mate, one of these, a little this guy that was staying in the same hostel as myself
This is in
as
Spain,
I.
right?
Yeah, and he was a Spanish guy, and
Hmm.
so I would have everything put in his name. He would charge, and then he would just give me the cash. And so I think a lot of that illustration is in his name, but I got to do it. And a lot of it was books that were in English. And while they were doing the translation, I could do the illustration since I could read it in English. And
Hmm.
so I had a little bit of it was more, I guess I had an advantage on the competition that I could get it
Yeah.
out faster than the
Ah.
other illustrators that couldn't read in English.
Mm.
And so I did a couple of books in Spain and Madrid, and then I worked on a couple of the little magazines that come inside the newspaper and stuff. And
What kind
really
of things were you
interesting work.
illustrating?
What's that?
What kind of things were you illustrating during this time frame?
Conceptual stuff. I was writing about. There was a book. I mean, a few of them were book covers.
Okay.
Another one was the concept of teaching homeschooling your kids.
See.
And I was really happy with that one. And just one of these little segments in newspapers, the editorial segments, and really great, interesting work. And it paid horribly. It was like
Mm.
$200 for an illustration, and so I couldn't quite make ends meet with that.
Yeah.
So then I moved back to the United States and did some fine arts. I sold a few paintings, and this is the time when I was back in San Francisco, and I was living in North Beach and painting a lot. And I was really happy, but I was working at a restaurant at the same time, and I was just, really struggling. And at the same time, seeing all my colleagues from art school that were making these great salaries,
Mm.
401k plans, first payment on a house, and they were all in the video game industry because that had taken off. It was just when I think the resolution had gotten to the point where you could really do some really nice art for
Yeah.
it. And so I went to the head of my department, Barbara Bradley. She was the head of the illustration department at the Academy of Art, and just asked her, like, please set me up with somebody. I want to get in this. And
Yeah.
she set me up with somebody at LucasArts. And I had an interview. my work at the time was so abstract and so non-video game relatable
Yeah.
that they put me in as a PA, and it's because I knew people. So the one thing that you asked about, like, how do you get into this industry? It really is the connections you make. You know, the connections, the friendships. I still am really good friends with the initial those people that I started out with.
Yeah.
They became like really close friends. Had it not been for their help, I mean, I got a PA job, a production assistant job, which is really just help out in whatever way you can. And in
Yeah.
the meantime, we'll see if you can kind of get up to speed on stuff. And so that was my in at LucasArts. And eventually I became a junior animator and then an animator and then a lead animator.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that was my start was video games.
So when we talk about animation, like what you were learning in school, like the illustrations and then the work you did in Spain and then some of the art you did and, selling pieces, that art, I know it's different from the art people make in video games.
Totally.
Did you learn? So was it like one of those things that you learned on the job, or did you already
Yes.
have some of the tools that you learned from college and your experiences? Like,
Well,
because I know the arts are
I
different.
could draw figures. I could draw the human
Okay.
figure, and so that was a big help that I could draw.
Okay.
I remember they were doing a lot of people at the time were coming down with, at the time it was called carpal tunnel syndrome.
Yes. Yes.
And so I remember the head of the department made out this little pamphlet for people, for artists there to like do these exercises,
Mm-hmm.
these little things.
Yeah.
And I had the main character of the video game that they were working on do these exercises. I drew all these pictures of him doing them as a little pamphlet thing. And I think that got the attention of some people.
Ah.
And so then they trained me in animation, and I can't say I'm a good animator. For the time, I could do 10 frames what is it, 10 frames a second, but the quality and the level that you do now is just like, it's way beyond me. So,
How
yeah,
does animation come to life from you drawing like on a piece of paper to now it's showing up on your screen in your video game? What's
yeah.
the process that happens there?
Well, I was doing 2D most of the time. And
Okay.
so and it was my first, when I was doing it, it was like basically everything with a stylus pen
Okay.
and drawing just basically you're going, it's called straight ahead animation. You're
Mm,
not doing really like your keyframes and your in-betweens and all that kind of stuff.
okay.
The way that they work now is there's a very systematic way of doing it, which is your key poses and you do your in-betweens. You do a first pass, which is the kind of a blocking pass. And there's another, I think it's called your, golden poses. The director approves those. They're all linear stepped, which is, you don't see any flowing. You just see pose to pose to pose. And once that's approved, then it goes into the next step, which is splining. And there's a whole, this is a religion. Animation is, those guys are like, they're like Zen Buddhist monks. I mean, they're so into it and so focused on what they do. And I have all the respect for those guys. What I did ended up being layout, which is cinematography and basic prevising what the shots will look like, more or
Mm,
less, how they're gonna be timed, what we're gonna see in camera, and what the animators are then gonna take and do the performance on.
mm,
And so what's nice is that I had enough of an animation background by then that I could do the basics, the basic layout version of the posing and the timing and all that stuff. The nuancy stuff is the stuff that it's beyond me. Like all that, and where you see into their souls,
yeah.
animation is really like, when you do a good job, it's just like, it's mind blowing how much you
Mm,
can transmit through, through characters. And if you really know what you're doing in animation, and that's just, I was never ever going to be there. And so for me, um, layout was great because it gave me the chance to do the broad strokes and
okay.
really, say, okay, we want to start in on a full shot or an establishing of this place, and then we go deep into this character. But I don't have to deal with what their internal, all the subtext, the internal performance, all that stuff is. And so I got to do like a lot of great work with the director. on finding what his story points were for those shots or those sequences, and then the animator could go in and really, you know, transmit all that stuff, the emotionality of the scenes within that structure that we'd created.
That's so fascinating. Yeah, I've always been curious about this world, and I'm sure that right now it looks drastically different from when you were starting out. I'm sure there's like a lot more technology that maybe helps a little some of that, some of those processes. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
easier now or more complicated, but I would assume that it was a lot more intensive when you were starting out as compared to
No,
now.
you know what? The more the technology speeds up, the more the demand. So
Yeah.
so no, it never gets easier. It's just
Mm,
you have to pump out more work, and right now the quality it's really gotten to the point where technology is so good. You can do
yeah.
anything, and you can previs almost anything. You can previs just cloth. You can previs effects. You can previs all sorts of stuff to a certain degree. But they want it
Done it
fast.
quick. Yeah.
Yeah, because the animators are waiting on you, and so you're really like you got to get it. So your job is get it past the director,
Mm,
get them to like it before animation starts. Because if you don't have time, the animators will get to it, and then the directors will rethink it, and then it becomes this big bottleneck. And it maybe comes back to camera, which means the animators hate your guts because you've ruined their shot because you changed the angle of the camera, and it just becomes a big mess. And so the idea is by the time the animators get it, the idea is there, and they just need to work on performance.
interesting. So when you're working on LucasArts, because for people who might be wondering, like, oh, what kind of stuff did you make at LucasArts? For example, you made Full Throttle, The Dig, Curse of Monkey Island, Escape from Monkey Island. You know, those are some well-known games from LucasArts.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about you drawing from the beginning, like, what's the timeline of work here?
This is going way back.
Yeah,
This
sorry.
is going way, way back. At LucasArts, I was just like in this daze of like, oh my God, I can't believe I have a job.
Yeah.
And I mean, I found my way through it. There's some shots. So I was an animator, a
Yeah.
junior animator. And so I was doing mostly like the small characters doing the gameplay stuff. I wasn't doing a lot of
Mm,
cinematic stuff, like bigger,
okay.
like full screen stuff.
Yeah.
But when I did, I look back on my work and it looks so me and not in the style, which is not a good thing.
Mm,
There's this scene where the main protagonist they capture him beating this old, you know, rich motorcycle owner. His name's Corley. And I got really bloody with it. And I'm surprised they let that through. It did. It got through. This got like blood all over his face and stuff. And
yeah.
it was not in the style. I'm not sure why they let that. I think it's because it was a time when they were more permissive with, you know, it was just like, okay, well, let's try this. And, you know,
Yeah.
and I think as the games have evolved, it's much more controlled. Every aspect is much more controlled.
Mm,
But at the time, I mean, I think I designed one or two characters, really secondary, tertiary, minor characters. But the fact that you could actually design this stuff while you were
yeah.
going was really like not, it's not normal. It
Mm,
doesn't happen anymore. So yeah, so that was Full Throttle. The Dig was a little bit more learning. I was a little bit more serious and more savvy in the process, and I started working on paper, which is a whole nother thing, flipping, you know, animation paper and doing blue pencil like sketches and roughs and stuff. And then after that, I went on to Outlaws, and I got to be lead animator on that. And I got to design all the characters and do storyboarding and work with the team on really developing the look.
yeah.
And that was really fun. That was
That does
great.
sound like fun. Yeah.
That was
How
great.
did
It was a spaghetti Western. So it was
yeah.
completely like, and you know, I have a little bit of the Texan in me was like really like excited about working on a Western.
I can imagine. So, before we kind of move on to like how, if you got involved in more video games or you ended up going elsewhere,
Yeah.
how do these characters get in your head? Like how is a director, do they tell you, okay, this is we kind of want you to make this troll like character, or do you just
There
kind of
were
like
There were
how does that
character
work?
descriptions. There were definitely
Okay.
character descriptions, but I was given a ton of leeway. And so I
Mm,
knew the main character was supposed to be a Clint Eastwood type, dark kind
yeah.
of hero kind of guy, anti-hero guy. But the rest were, there was a guy, Dr. Death, who was this surgeon gone kind of crazy. And, and, I mean, I just research. I just did lots of research,
Okay.
and had a great time just finding, different characters that would inspire me to create those guys.
Okay.
And
So is it
so,
more like you imitate something you might see, or are
oh
you more
yeah,
just like it comes straight from your head, pen,
never.
never?
I'm always inspired. No, if I wasn't working like that in a void, I'd never come up with anything fun. Yeah, you got to research. You got to
Yeah.
do, um, and I didn't, I didn't copy. I hope anything, but it was really just taking off from, I wanted to find some surgeons from the time, if
Mm,
I'm, speaking of this one character, I was
yeah.
looking for what did surgeons look like in the Old West, and
Yeah.
trying to, and so I have no idea what they looked like and what they wore, but I found a few and they were really inspiring and really cool looking.
Mm,
And so that led to coming up with some cool, some ideas for that. But I've always, even now, like in my fine arts work, a lot of it's based on childhood memories, but a lot of that is basically stuff that I grew up with.
yeah.
The Lone Ranger for me was a huge part of my life. So I incorporate things from my memory, and I need to research, visually what that stuff, looked like.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And then I find stuff from the research that actually takes me into a whole nother, down this other road, down this
Mm,
other path. And so it's the fun, the
yeah.
beauty of research.
Yeah. No, that sounds really cool. Okay, cool. So moving on to it looks like you may have left video games.
I left video games because Star Wars was becoming the predominant thing at LucasArts. George Lucas was focused, he was starting to focus on I believe he was starting to kind of think about the prequels, and he wanted to build up, you know, audience again, and get those characters back in the spotlight and get that world back in the spotlight. And so, and the adventure games weren't economically, I don't think they were doing amazingly well. They were,
Mm,
everybody loved them, but you got to
yeah.
you got to make the money to keep it going. And so the adventure games started to fall to secondary, you know, place in comparison with the Star Wars stuff. And I started thinking, first of all, I wanted to make my own movie. I wanted to make a
Mm,
short film, which I was lucky enough to be able to do. And based on that, I think Toy Story had come out just around that time, which was like mind blowing.
yes.
And so I wanted to do it dark. I wanted to do dark stuff. I always wanted to do kind of darker stuff. And
Oh,
so I did this version of Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis. Um, just a small piece of it, but it got me even more hungry to do film.
mm,
And so after that, I did that in Spain. I spent a year in Barcelona, 2 years in Barcelona working
okay.
on this short film. And then I came back and worked, I ended up working at DreamWorks.
Yeah. Just before we got into DreamWorks, did you actually get to meet George Lucas when you're working at LucasArts?
I met him, but I met him like everybody else did. There's lots of rules. At the time, there were a lot of rules about what you can do because he's there.
Oh, he's
He would
actually
come
there.
in.
Okay.
He would come into the studio. I mean, Lucas. So Lucas, what is it? Lucas, the ranch where he kind of does his day to day stuff. That's up in these hills, up in the Marin County
Mm,
area, and LucasArts was down more towards the highway.
yeah.
And so we would drive over there for Fourth of July and for different events, and he would come to LucasArts. But there were all these really strict rules, like you couldn't talk to him unless he talked to you first.
Oh,
You had to be really like conscious of how you interacted with him. I think it's because there were so many Star Wars nerds that,
Yeah.
he would be overwhelmed like every day. He wouldn't be able to get anything done. I think one of my friends actually like fell off a chair like next to him, was drunk, like I don't know. There's all sorts of embarrassing things because he's surrounded by Star Wars geeks,
Yeah, because
and
especially for you, since you said Star Wars was your inspiration to become an
yeah,
artist. So
yeah.
what was that like for you to like breathe the same air as the guy who inspired
I
who
just wanted to stay
sparked
away
you?
from him. I
Yeah,
didn't want to be
really.
near. I was too afraid. And I was mortified to be near the guy because
Mm,
he was this godlike character for me,
yeah.
And so I didn't. I maybe shook his hand once, and that was it. I'd had enough. I couldn't. The light of George Lucas was too bright for me.
There are people who say never meet your heroes because, it's very scary. Like you could have a negative interaction with that person and
Oh
it just
yeah, then in the end they're just
completely
human beings.
ruins and maybe you could just be having a bad day or maybe you just
Yeah,
didn't
of
like
course.
live up to the expectation that you had in your head or something. So people always say like, hey man, just if never
Totally.
really meet your heroes because you
I
could.
agree, and I've been lucky. I've met the directors I've worked with. Obviously I've interacted with a lot of them, and a lot of times they're people, and sometimes they have good days, and sometimes they have bad days, and
Yeah.
you just I've been really fortunate. Like I think in the animation world, directors are much just they're nicer people.
Mm,
I've heard stories from live action
yeah.
that it can be pretty intense if you piss the director off or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's time. I think it's part of it's just time is money, and they're really concerned with getting the shot and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And in animation, you're just you're working, and it's not that sense of that we
Mm,
got to get this right now. And so the directors that I've worked with have always been just almost always been sweethearts, and they know the way to get the best out of you is to just make you feel like you're part of the team, and
yeah.
you're recognized and stuff. So that's one thing about the animation world that I've always felt is really it's a nurturing environment for the most
So
part.
do animation directors get the same fame and clout as action movie directors?
I don't think so. I mean I know that there's a few of them that have gone into live action, and it's not an easy step to go from
Mm,
animation to live action. And a few of them have done really well, and a few of them haven't
mm,
succeeded. So no, I think it's a different world. You're really an animation director gets to mull his ideas over and see different versions and see how it progresses. Whereas a live action director is really thinking on his feet all the time.
yeah,
That's the sense. That's what I get out of it. I can't say for sure, but it
yeah,
seems like it's a much more nurturing environment for the director as well.
mm,
You know,
yeah. What are
um,
some of the big name directors that you actually ended up working with?
well, John Lasseter on Cars too. And he was always just a very, very sweet guy. I mean,
Nice.
he was a very emotional guy. And I could see, his, he loved, I think he's like a little kid. He loved his characters, and he loved his little
Yeah.
toys and his cars and his little world that he was, his little Hawaiian shirt and stuff.
Yeah.
So it just felt like you were wanting to make this kid
Gonna make
happy.
him
Like,
happy. Yeah.
yeah. Make his, toys come to life. Um, the honestly, the best directors I ever worked with were on Nimona. They were, and that was the last big film I worked on.
Mm,
And I think part of it was, it had been, they'd been shut down by Disney. This was Blue
mm,
Sky, and they had created probably the best film they had ever made up to that date, and I think they were so grateful and so happy that it got brought back to life
yeah.
with a much lesser budget, and not their little, not their blue sky team,
Yeah.
but with a bunch of people that really wanted to make this thing happen. And I think they were really appreciative. And I think it was just I think anybody you ask that worked on that project is going to say it was almost a life-changing thing. It was such
Huh.
a, an amazing thing to work on. And I think after that, I just felt like, okay, that's it. It's not going to
You've
get better
reached,
than this.
yeah, you've reached your peak.
Yeah, I don't, and I work, the work I did at Pixar, especially, Brave, working with Mark Andrews, he's an amazing guy. He's a little bit overpowering,
Mm,
but, but in a good way. He
yeah.
knows when he's like just getting to be too much and you're just kind of cowering. He would yell at me across the hallway, like, Charlie!
Yeah.
And I would just be like, no, please don't, I'm not here. And I think he could sense how he was mortifying for me, and he would just back off. But
Yeah.
he was a great guy, and yeah. But the directors on Nimona were just great. They
I
were
love
amazing.
that. No, that's awesome. So okay, so actually getting more into DreamWorks and Pixar. So you're explaining like what was your introduction into DreamWorks? Like so you said your short film kind of inspired you to kind of like then is that what you used?
My short film opened the door for me.
Okay.
It gave me a reel because I didn't go
Mm,
to film school. I was in art school,
yeah.
and so doing that gave me a demo reel to be able to get
Mm,
into. First, Will Benton Studios, which was a small Portland studio that turned into Leica,
okay.
and then DreamWorks. And I became a modeler. On I just fell into
What is
modeling.
that? What is a modeler?
Modeling's you create the assets, you create the props and the sets and the characters, and you just create the world. And so I sent my reel, and the head of the modeling department at the time, Jeff White, saw my work, um, and he and yeah, we got along really well, and it worked out really well. And so yeah, I did that for a while, and I knew I didn't. Modeling wasn't where my heart was at,
Yeah.
but eventually I was able to transition into layout.
Oh, that's awesome. So, I mean, at when you were as a modeler at DreamWorks, that's when you did Shrek. That's when you did Madagascar. That's when you did Over the Hedge. What was that experience like working on these big movies, right? Because these are box office hits, right?
Yeah.
So, what was that like? Because when you got there, did you know that they were working on these, and then maybe did they came later, or like were you there at the very beginning of like some of these movies, like again like Over the Hedge, for example? Were you there at the very beginning? What was that experience like?
Um, it was, it was huge going into film and going into this. At the time, it was DreamWorks had its office in Redwood City. It was a department called PDI, Pacific Data Images, and it was this beautiful campus with a gym and soccer fields and
Nice.
free breakfast and lunch, and just I felt like I was in this weird like version of heaven for animators.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I think I misquoted his name. His name was Jeff Hayes. He was so warm and accommodating and patient with me because although I knew how to model, I had learned to model through just the short film I made, and
Yeah.
then working at Will Benton. But the way they modeled was very different, and so
Mm,
they were really patient with me, and
okay.
they allowed me to kind of slowly get up to speed and stuff. And I was there for 2 years, and I loved it, but I knew that modeling wasn't
What's
my
your thing?
calling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I got up to speed, but I think there was definitely a point when I felt like I wanted I could see the possibilities from the short film that I worked on. I could see the possibilities of layout and previs,
Mm,
and by this time I had some experience in animation and modeling,
yeah.
and having those two experiences makes you an even yeah a stronger layout artist because that's
Oh,
what you do. You don't do modeling, but you do pre-modeling.
yeah.
You don't do animation, but you do previs animation. And so having all those kind of tools made it the perfect time to go into layout. So I was at DreamWorks for 2 years, I think, working on those films. My last
Yeah.
film was I think it was Over the Hedge or Madagascar. I'm not sure which one came first. But I got a job offer at this with the same people that I had worked at before on the short film in Spain to do this movie in Galicia. Galicia
Okay.
is the northwest part of Spain, and it was great. The most attractive thing for me was I got to be a layout. I went straight into supervising the layout department
Nice.
because I'd been at DreamWorks,
Yeah.
so I had some clout there,
Good on the
and
CV.
yes, great on the CV. And
Yeah.
you know, I at the time it was still very early in the 3D animation world, and so I knew more than probably a lot of people there.
Mm.
And I did that film, and immediately after that, I was able to go on to Planet 51, which was another film being made in Spain. And I supervised the layout department there too. And yeah, I just those 2 years were just learning a lot. I mean, no, it was a lot. It was actually longer than that. I was on Planet 51 until 2009. So it was about 5, 6 years that I worked on, and it was like an intensive, you know, learning moment, like just learning previs, learning layout, because we
Mm.
were redoing these sequences. They were rewriting the script a lot,
Yeah.
so we had to redo these sequences and rethink them and figure out what the story points of these things were. And
I didn't
so
know there was such a big animation hub in Spain. I
that's
really,
huge.
yeah, I had no idea because what are they like any big animation
Well,
things that come?
Skydance.
Oh, Skydance? Okay.
Skydance is in Madrid. I mean, they're based. I guess their main hub is in LA, and John Lasseter is one of the the heads of Skydance.
Mhm.
Also, who else? There's a few people there that are Pixar people
Okay.
that are doing a lot of the work for Skydance. And Brad Bird. I think Brad Bird's developing a film there as well. Um, so that's a big studio, but there's also
Mm.
a lot of smaller studios doing a lot of work
Yeah.
in the
Okay.
Canary Islands, in Valencia, and there's a lot of different studios around there that are doing great stuff.
It's so fascinating how this Spain thing for you was, it sounds like, the woman you said you fell in love with, like your muse that took you to Spain. And now it's like you kept going back after all these
Yeah,
opportunities.
it just so happened, yeah, that the industry kind of took me back there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's always funny how life works, it's always so
totally.
fascinating. Just it takes you where you need to go, and then
Yeah.
life just yeah, it's just that's always a fun thing about life. So and then it looks like you then ended up becoming a layout artist at Pixar, which is where you actually worked on a lot of these movies. You mentioned Brave already,
Yep.
Cars, Monsters University, Party Central, The Good Dinosaur. You
Yeah.
know, how was that experience for you now as your preferred role as a layout person at a
Well,
big studio?
it was mixed. It was a mixed it's a great studio. Obviously, it's like it's the best studio in
Yeah.
animation. They are everything there is just done, they have swimming pool, basketball court, full I learned boxing
Oh,
there. I mean, I was like having such a good time, but at the same time, um I was in the midst of a divorce, and that was a big, I had at the time I had two small kids, two small boys, and so it was a mix. It almost seems like I don't know if you've experienced it, but in life there's always this great element, and then it's combined with this really negative element, and you're just
yeah,
having to balance. It's never like everything is lining up perfectly. At least I
exactly.
haven't experienced that.
The real definition of bittersweet, right? Like
Yeah,
there's the sweet and
yeah,
then there's a real bitter part of it, but I don't know.
yeah,
That's life, I guess. Yin and yang, as they say.
yeah. And so I mean, the beginning, my first few years there were amazing. Cars 2 was the first project, and it was, more me just panicking, trying to learn the system and trying to make sure I stayed in.
Yeah.
Because Pixar has always had the system that you're not permanent until after the first film. They kind of decide whether they're going to keep you on or not.
Oh, okay.
And so you're like you're trying
Mm.
to
Are
prove
you the only
yourself.
one? Were you the only layout artist like working on? How many are you that are like layout people?
Oh, it's a team of about 24 people, I think,
Okay.
but working on usually working about two different films.
Okay.
12, usually 12 artists a film,
Mm.
and
Okay.
it builds, and then it shrinks as the film, gets to a certain point.
I see. Okay.
Um, at the time, we were, I think, the majority of the team was on Cars 2, and a small part of it was working on the beginnings of Brave. And
Mm.
so I started on Cars 2. Pixar has all sorts of internal drama and stuff going on. And so there was issues with the director at the time. I think the director of Brave got, I, I, I don't know what happened with her. She was there and then she wasn't there.
Yeah.
I was just getting on, Brenda Chapman. I heard it was her story though.
Oh.
And so there was a lot of, weird inside, like the animators had problems with her, but the layout artist loved her, and it was
Oh.
almost like this weird family dynamic.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't there. I was too young there to understand all the ins and outs of it. But by the time I got on Brave, Mark Andrews was fully on board as the director,
Hmm.
and Steve Purcell, who I had worked with at LucasArts, was
Mm.
co-director.
Oh.
And so I was actually in heaven. I
Yeah.
love Steve Purcell. He's a great guy, any chance to work with him was great. And I got to know Mark Andrews, and he was great too. And it was a very solid team.
Yeah.
My supervisor, Rob Anderson, amazing, sweet man. Yeah, really, really great experience. I think by the time after that was Monsters University. And by then they had shifted their kind of model to doing, instead of one film a year, they were trying to do two films what was it? Three films every 2 years or something like that. And so it started becoming the culture of the layout department. I felt a change in it. It became a little bit more of a two teams, and less of a cohesive kind of
Yeah.
one department. And, it wasn't bad. The film was great. I think Monsters
Brave was good. Oh, yeah.
University.
Monsters University was good. Yeah. All
Yeah,
these
it
movies
came
are
out
good.
it came out great. And the supervisor was a great guy. But I think after Monsters University, I was starting to feel like
It's
this
run its
I
course.
yeah, like, I mean, after a while, in the end, I feel like these, as big as the name is, your day to day, you go and you sit down and you're working 8 hours a day on a film. And I was feeling like I needed some kind of change. And I think it's, back to, my whole life has been moving and seeing
Yeah.
new things and stuff. And I think they could also see the frustration in me. And so, yeah, at a certain point after The Good Dinosaur, I think, it was enough. And I decided to pick up and find a new direction.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's always a good thing to do. I mean, because there are people who stick in things that no longer serve them for a lot
Yeah.
longer than they should, and it's like, hey,
Yeah.
the time's up. It's the time's up, and you just gotta stay true to yourself and kind of move on, and
Yeah.
chase, or not chase, but go after what you feel is where you're supposed to
It's gonna
be.
fulfill you, yeah. And
Yeah,
I think if you don't, it's like it's obvious. You know it. You just
yeah.
start dying inside. And I had a good friend, Colin Levy, who was a layout artist. We were in the same office, and he wanted to be a director. And I think he's been following his path. And I think he was a lot younger than me when he started. After like one or two films, he was out, and I was thinking, you just got here. This
Yeah.
is like I don't know how old he was. He was just I think he had recently been out of, university, or, animation school, and he was off again. And I thought that was so brave of him to,
Yeah.
as good and perfect and beautiful, and the swimming pool and the parties and all that stuff is, you're going off to find your calling.
Yeah.
and it's commendable. I mean, I think it's amazing to have that kind of bravery.
You need bravery. You need a lot of bravery in the artistic world, to be honest.
Yeah.
You need a lot of that. But before we kind of move on, how does it feel for you when you work on these films that end up being while, like very big box office, people love them, people relate to them. Do you watch them yourself and you're like, wow, I worked on that? I mean, what's that experience like for you when you work on something that's like,
I have little moments, and then it's like, it's still me. I'm still, eh,
really?
whatever. I mean, I helped in these films, but I mean, I, I don't know. I'm happy. I feel I was lucky to be able to collaborate with them and stuff, and it goes back to what I was saying is, I really, one of the biggest highs for me is making a director happy,
Mhm.
figuring out what their vision is and
Yeah.
giving them that and doing the best option I can for them. But, but in the end, there's nothing for an artist, I think there's nothing better than finding your own voice.
Yes.
And as much as you will do great work and be collaborative and make great connections with people, finding your own voice for me
Hmm.
has always been, even though I didn't know it, I
Yeah.
didn't realize it a long time. I felt like, no, success, having people recognize me,
Yeah.
having my credit on IMDb, having this big list,
Yeah.
counting, how many films that, and then it's like, whatever,
Yeah.
for me, being able to express my own, vision is so much more important and so much more rewarding. As
Yeah.
small as that is.
And I get that. Your own voice is definitely important. I want to get more into that, but I'm also just curious. So when you watch these films after they're done, do you like, does your artist mind shut down and like you just enjoy the movie? Or do you kind of watch it and it's like, man, I remember that 8 hours. That was tough. And then
That's
like, oh,
exactly it.
that's exactly it. Yeah.
It takes me back to the moment and the history and the people and the coffee I went out to have with this person and the great,
Mm,
you know, we went out to karaoke that during that moment. I mean,
yeah.
that's what I take out of those. I mean, the premiere is when you have the wrap party and they take you to the theater and you get to see it for the first time on the big screen.
Yeah.
That is when you take in the
You're
the
taking everything.
the bigness of the accomplishment.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's really about the memories that you have with those
Yeah.
people. You know, um, yeah. And so now, I mean, if I watch Cars 2, I'll think I remember what was going on.
What was going on?
It was
That
what was
was
going on around the film, not the film.
That the film itself. No, that's so cool. So, what about when you watch films that you were not a part of, like other animations? If you do you still like think about what's happening in the background, or do you actually just consume the film as it's put out?
Well, I mean, it depends. Like with animation, I have, like I said, I have a harder time watching animation just because I have a hard time giving it the focus and the attention.
Mm.
Um, there haven't, I mean, we were talking about, Wild Robot.
Wild Robot, yes.
Yeah, that was one that I was kind of hesitating watching because it's another, another
Yeah.
big feature film. And people at the studio that I was at were like, "No, you got to see this. This is so good." And
Yes.
it's true. And so yeah, I mean, you have to fully, give yourself to the moment in the film and stuff.
Yeah.
And so that one was one of the few. But for me, live action stuff is much more like
That's what's it's at.
it's more compelling for me. It draws me in more. Yeah.
I feel that. Okay, so and then so talking about you finding your voice, what was your voice? Was it doing fine art? What was that thing for you
Yeah.
that just, or was it doing another feature film? What was that
If
voice for you?
if the film was with the Nimona team, I would, in a heartbeat, I would go back and work on another one with these guys. Right now, I'm focusing on painting, and
Yes.
I'm just starting to get a little bit of footing in Montreal, in the gallery scene, and just starting to build connections with people and with different groups around town, and finding my voice in fine art, which is really it's a big challenge. It's a scary realm. Fine arts is really like finding your own creativity and your own voice, and not one of the biggest things for me is like don't like not being so this there's this tendency to be manipulative,
Mm,
and like I want the audience to react a certain way with what I've done, so
mm,
I'm going to do this and this because I know that'll give a reaction.
yeah.
And that's not, to me, that's completely not
Huh.
what is inside me. It's more
Mm,
being my authentic self and not worrying about what anybody's going to think about the painting.
mm.
And it's hard because I came from illustration, which is all about that
Evoking emotion.
selling stuff, yeah, selling
Yes.
ideas. And so right now, what I've started doing is there's a book called The Artist's Way, and basically one of the concepts is morning pages. And what you do is you get up in the morning and you
Hmm.
write for 20 minutes and don't think.
Mm,
And I swear the most interesting stuff comes out of that. It's like stuff that
mm,
you wouldn't even imagine was there because you're not letting your conscious brain kind of guide you. You're not
yeah.
thinking, what's this going to be perceived as and blah, blah, blah. You're really just like pouring out stuff that has been
Huh.
kind of locked in there. And
Yeah.
my paintings are completely based on subconscious, like nothing I even understand. It's like, I don't know what it is. I don't know why I put
You
that there.
just, you just put it in there. Yeah. So are you doing more like abstract art? What kind of
It's
art?
no, it's representative. I mean,
Okay.
I'm that's one of my crutches is I'm an illustrator, so I want to draw and I
Hmm.
want to put things that are recognizable, and so a lot of the imagery that comes out is stuff that from my childhood.
Okay.
Um, I have being brought up between a very Texan culture and a Mexican culture. There's a lot of weird, I'll have in a painting Hank Williams sitting inside a Mexican skull.
Mm,
Uh, it's just a big jumble of like cultures, but for me, that kind of clash of all the inputs that I had as a child is important, you know?
yeah. I mean, that's what makes you you, right? Because at the end
Exactly.
of the day, art is about you as Charlie. Like this is because there's not gonna be any other artist that's you. So whatever
Yeah.
you produce is uniquely you. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
yeah, that's all
And
it
it can
is.
come off really strange, but
Yeah.
it's what's there. So it's what and that's when I feel really comfortable is letting that stuff out and not really worrying about what the narrative is and what how the
Mm.
audience is going to perceive it.
No, so as we close out here, because I'm also like a creative, and I myself face times where I'm not encouraged. I'm not feeling, I just watched a recent podcast about how like sometimes artists, you're in this space where you're just really low. Things are not just either you
Yeah.
have a creative block, either you have, people are not buying your art or people are not
Yeah.
welcoming your art, but you still have to show up every day for yourself. So what do you do as in those moments when you're feeling like, man, should I keep doing this fine art stuff or should I just try get back into Pixar or film or
No, I think it's exactly what you're saying is just understand that that's part of the process is being afraid a lot of times and
yeah.
being, having that sense of what the hell am I doing? And also just knowing that that's part of the artistic experience, I think,
Mm,
is self-doubt. And I
mm,
think if you're not self-doubting, I think if you're not
yeah.
in a space of self-doubt, you're probably just becoming an artisan.
Hmm. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like you're just repeating stuff that you
You're
know
just reading,
works.
yeah.
And when you're self-doubting and when you're in this kind of weird, panicky, whatever, insecure place, I think that's when you're creating.
Huh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, because I like I said, especially with this podcast, right, where I'm doing it and I really love it. This is
Yeah.
where my passions are. But at the end of the day, it's like there's this voice in the back of your mind.
Are
What's
you
this gonna
totally,
lead to?
yeah.
What is this?
It's
What's
just
gonna? What am
nothing.
I doing? Am I just wasting my time? What am I
Yeah.
doing? But whilst I'm in it, it's the best feeling in the world, right? But then it's
Yeah.
like, man, and so it's like, then I'm like, but there has to be a reason why.
Yeah.
if it just felt like, yeah, because then you go online, you research, how can I make a podcast really successful? How can I do this? How can I do that? And you read a bunch of stuff and people saying a bunch of things. I'm like, man, I don't feel connected to any of that, and I don't feel like I want to do any of that, and I feel like it's
Yeah.
not even what makes me want to do it.
Yeah.
Like, so it's but at the end of the day, you still gotta pay your bills. So
There's the crux of the whole
yeah.
thing. You do have to pay your bills. I'm lucky right now. I'm in a place where that's okay. So I have a little bit of space to just try
Right.
this venture and maybe next, if we have another one of these, I'll be like, yeah, I'm in layout again. Working on another feature. Um,
Yeah.
I hope not. I hope this is not going to be, I hope we don't have that interview.
So at the end of things, Charlie, so what's your dream at this current moment? Is your dream to like have your art being shown in a massive art gallery? Like what's
I'm
the
hoping
end
to
goal?
I'm hoping to get into the gallery
Mm,
scene. There's a few possibilities that are opening up, but I right now it's what's driving me. Like I paint every day because if not, I'm panicking. I'm
yeah.
like, move your ass.
You gotta, yeah.
You gotta produce. You
Yeah.
gotta make some stuff. And so it's a big drive, and it's producing a lot of really interesting work. That fire,
Hmm.
in your butt really like gets you going and gets the creative
Yeah.
juices going.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's cool.
so
So
yeah.
where if someone's listening to this and they're like, I want to see what art you're doing, where can they find pieces of your art?
Well, I don't know if you had the link on LinkedIn. I think I'd put it's charlieramos.net.
Mm. Okay.
So yeah, I just everything I'm painting goes in there.
Okay. And I think you're on Instagram too. Is it Charlie's Arts or something like that?
It's Charlie Ramos art, and I think
Okay.
I'll put a link to the website as well, so that anybody that's interested can take a look.
I'm
And
also when I post this episode, I'm also gonna put the link and link your Instagram too, so that people can get to see what kind of pieces you create. Because I know people will be interested. Like, hey, what kind of art is this guy?
great.
Like, what's he doing? So that 100%, I'm gonna show that and have people see that. Well, you know what? Because
Awesome.
like I said, I'm trying to come to Montreal in the summer, so if your art
Hey,
somewhere, I'll hit you up and be like, hey, can I? Do you have any art anywhere? Or I want to go see it. So I
definitely
will.
do. That would
Yeah,
be awesome. That'd be great.
yeah. I'll definitely do that. Well, Charlie,
Okay.
I appreciate you taking the time to really give some insight into your
That was a
journey
pleasure.
as a professional animator, layout artist, all these experiences you've had. For me personally, as an animation geek, this has been a phenomenal experience just to talk to someone who's
Likewise. It's
worked
been really
on,
nice.
yeah, who's worked on all these things that are deeply connected to me. Like I said, I love Over the Hedge. So to speak to someone who's actually had a hand in it, it's a phenomenal feeling. So
Oh, thanks,
I
man.
appreciate you saying yes to coming on here and to as well as giving other people out there who also have been curious. Because again, it's not as if we know all the nuances and the day to day about how are these things made and all
Yeah.
the people that make them. So I hope people love the more personal side of it. That there are actually
Yeah.
people who are it's not just magic. There are
Yeah.
actually people who kind of do this. So I do
Definitely.
appreciate your time.
Well, thanks to you for allowing me to be on your podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, with that, I think that's a fine place to end the pod. And listener, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And look out for more episodes, and we'll catch you on the next one.